Moi drodzy, gdzie się podziały tamte franchise'y? Zobaczmy, co robi Sony nie tak jak powinno.
Few iconic franchises, many dating right back to the original PlayStation. But while we're pretty familiar with the likes of ongoing series such as God of War, Horizon and
Ale
Gran
God of
Turismo,
War też kurde czekał, nie? Jezus Maria, po ilu latach oni wskrzesili God of War'a? Daj spokój.
there are plenty of PlayStation franchises that haven't seen the light of
Ty,
day.
a to w ogóle, ten shop, czy no, ten gościu, to on jest robiony przez ludzi od Ghost of Tsushima, nie? Sly Cooper.
Franchises that haven't seen the light of day in a long time. So in this video, we're going to be taking a look at the status of PlayStation's many IPs and checking in on when we last heard from them. I'll be going through the list in alphabetical order. all the way
Zobaczymy,
from
o czym Sony zapomniało, a o czym fani absolutnie nie Ty, ja pamiętam tą grę.
Ape Escape to Vib Ribbon. So let's get started.
Oj, ciekawe, jak dużo jest tego.
We start with Ape Escape, the iconic
Ty,
platforming
Ape
series that
Escape
started
to jest gierka, w którą ja grałem na PS2 chyba. No,
life way back in 1999 on the PlayStation. Believe it or not, it's actually one of Sony's most prolific series, with over 13 titles across the franchise.
Ona była mega
Although many of those
popularna.
are party games and spin-offs that utilized various Sony peripherals like the iToy and
mi
PlayStation
się wydaje, że Ape'y były trochę odpowiedzią na to, w jakim kierunku szło Nintendo w tamtych czasach, wiecie? Tak mi to wyglądało zawsze.
Move. While the character of Spike appeared in Sony's Smash Bros. Rip-off PlayStation All-Stars Battle Royale,
Te takie
the
luźne,
last time we
familijne
saw
rzeczy.
a mainline entry into the Ape Escape franchise was all the way back in 2005, although we did get an RPG spin-off title for the PSP in 2008 called Ape Quest. While I'd say it's pretty unlikely we'll be getting a new Ape Escape anytime soon, you can at least play Ape Escapes 1, 2 and On the Loose on your PS5 right now. Here's hoping Sony adds Ape Escape 3 to that list in lieu of a
Tak,
new
chyba
game.
w ogóle w to grałem.
Next
PS2, tak.
up we have the tactical RPG series Ark the Lad, which started out
Zagrałbym coś takiego, coś w tym stylu. I dlatego Fear and Hunger będzie niedługo grane, bo mam straszną jakąś taką potrzebę zagrania w stary RPG. Znaczy coś w starym stylu, no.
life as a
Bo
trilogy
wiadomo,
of games
Fear
for
and
the
Hunger
original
stary nie jest.
PlayStation. While the franchise was huge in Japan back in its day, it didn't get a release in the West until the release
Gova
of an
Ascension wyszedł w 2013, więc na nowego Gova czekaliśmy 5 lat. W sumie nie aż tyle. Z drugiej strony, Gova Ascension był strasznie słaby w porównaniu do trylogii oryginalnej, nie?
The Lad Collection, which comprised the whole trilogy and was released back in 2002. While there was a brace of PS2 games, Twilight of the Spirits and End of Darkness in the mid-noughties, the only other Ark the
Pamiętam
Lad game we've
istnienie
had
czegoś takiego, ale nie grałem w tego Arka.
since has been the mobile game Ark the Lad R, which launched in 2018 and was shut down in 2021. So in short, the future for this dormant RPG franchise is looking a little precarious.
Ale takie coś ma
At least you
vibik.
can still play Twilight of the Spirits
Nie,
on
ja
your
jestem
PS.
mega nostalgicznym graczem, powiem wam szczerze. Jeżeli chodzi o mnie, to strasznie ciężko mi jest nie zakochać się w grach, które wyglądają i dają taki stary vibe, który ja dobrze wspominam.
5 though. The adorable little Astrobot
Nie, no
is next
błagam.
up on our list and is one of the few Sony franchises that we categorically know we'll see more of. All due to
Znaczy
the
to już wiadomo, ten film chyba został wcześniej robiony, bo teraz na tym programie aktualnym State of Play pokazali go. Ja tego totalnie nie rozumiem. Dla mnie to jest jakaś abstrakcja i idiotyzm. To jest jedna wielka reklama ich sprzętu i ich innych gier, po prostu brak pomysłu, zero kreatywności. Jest to dla mnie beznadziejna giera. No ale spoko, nie mam 7 lat, to może dlatego mi się nie podoba, nie wiem.
announcement of a new game at the recent State of Play showcase. Building on the success of 2020's Astro's Playroom, which
Stary,
was
no z gapa z Donkey
bundled with
Konga,
every
co dalej?
PS5. The new game, simply titled Astrobot, looks like much more of the same, and that is music to my ears as the last title was an enormously fun platformer. Astro's Playroom was such a critical success for Sony that it led to the crew behind the series,
Nie wiem, czy umiałbym zagrać w to zamiast w Crasha Bandicoota, no po prostu nie rozumiem, nie?
Team Asobi becoming a standalone studio outside of their previous status as an internal team within Japan studio. More power to them and their tiny little
Pominął
Astro
fakt,
Boy,
że
I
można
say.
dostać epilepsji.
Bloodborne,
Oh.
one of the firm fan favorites that's on Sony's rosters. The 2015 game was a huge
Moim zdaniem, moja teoria jest taka, że tam muszą być jakieś prawne problemy i komplikacje, bo to jest niemożliwe, że Sony od 10 lat nie chce z tego korzystać po prostu, nie chce wykorzystać szansy. I dla mnie to jest absurdalne. Bo wiesz, gry, które na razie były wymienione, no to takie case'y trochę martwych produktów, o których pamięta trochę graczy, ale nie wszyscy. O Bloodborne'a przy każdej możliwej okazji proszą wszyscy. Coś mi tu śmierdzi. Moim zdaniem po prostu coś jest niedogadane.
success for Sony, offering up a werewolf hunting twist on
Znaczy, ja w ogóle słyszałem, że to jest tak, że tam jest jakiś kod spaghetti, z drugiej strony słyszałem, że ten kod da się rozwiązać jedną linijką, więc nie wiem, są dwie różne wersje, ale chyba wytłumaczenie Sony było takie, że to musieliby całą grę od nowa postawić, no ale z drugiej strony chyba wam się to opłaca. Tyle ludzi kupiłoby, szczerze, gdyby oni zrobili z Bloodborne'a ekskluzywa na jakieś PlayStation 6, załóżmy, nie? Za jakiś czas, tyle ludzi by PlayStation 6 kupiło tylko dla tej gry, stary.
Where's classic Souls-like template. It struck such a chord that fans have been clamoring for a sequel, prequel, remake, remaster.
Bloodborne Sony by się nie zwrócił, a mi się wydaje, że by się zwrócił. Nie znam się aż tak na biznesie, wiadomo, ale mi się nieironicznie wydaje, że by się zwrócił i im dłużej czasu upływa, tym bardziej może się zwrócić. Aktualnie jesteśmy przy takiej kumulacji chętnych ludzi na Bloodborne'a, że na luzie by się zwrócił, coś czuję. Znaczy też zależy z jaką skalą by do tego podeszli, ale wydaje mi się, że gdyby po prostu zrobili remake tak jak Demon Soulsy, no to
anything from Sony ever since, but to absolutely no avail.
To by się
Whether
zwrócił.
we will ever see a follow-up to this stone cold classic is yet to be seen. But all I'm saying is that next year, 2025, marks the 10th anniversary.
Właśnie, zobaczcie ile jakby gatunek zyskał po wyjściu Eldena pod względem ilości fanów gatunku, nie? Jakby ludzi zajaranych Souls-like'ami jest fest więcej niż było przed Eldenem, niż było w czasach Bloodborne'a. Masz starych wyjadaczy, masz ludzi, którzy trochę Bloodborne'a poznali gdzieś tam w 2017, 18, 19 roku, masz ludzi, którzy go poznali podczas pandemii, masz ludzi, którzy go chcą po Elden Ringu, więc jest cała masa ludzi potencjalnie chętnych na Bloodborne'a, których jest dużo więcej niż ludzi, którzy kupowali Bloodborne'a 10 lat temu.
Of the game. Come on, Sony, pull your finger out. On top of Bloodborne, there's also Demon's Souls, which falls under Sony's remit as well. While the original was published by Atlus and Bandai Namco outside of Japan, the PS5 remake was very much a Sony affair. Whether we'll ever see a direct follow-up to Demon's Souls or even its predecessor Kingsfield is a big question mark, though.
Nie ma szans. Nie ma szans na Kingsfielda, nie ma szans na Demon's Souls 2. To są zamknięte tematy moim zdaniem totalnie. Bloodborne, myślę, że gdzieś taka opcja jest, że do 2030 roku może się zorientują, że coś warto z nim zrobić, ale nie wydaje mi się, żeby Kingsfield czy Demon's Soulsy były ruszone. To jest stara historia.
Especially when From Software are a little busy with something called Elden Ring. One of Sony's recent one-off titles, 2019's Days Gone, appears to be staying as just that, a solo affair. While the game saw a mixed critical reception at release, it sold well and has had a steady cult appeal since, leading to speculation that there could possibly be a sequel. But as a result of the lengthy development period, Sony allegedly turned down the chance to greenlight a sequel.
Totalnie
and
mnie
it
to nie
appears
jara.
that the developers behind the game, Bend Studio, have supposedly...
Średnio mnie obchodzi post-apo w takim klimacie, średnio mnie obchodzą zombiaki, średnio mnie obchodzi strzelanie, także totalnie ta gra do mnie nie jestem targetem, nie?
moved on to a different IP that utilizes the open world mechanics that they created with Days Gone. Next up we have Dreams, the incredibly ambitious game
Nie miałem pojęcia
creator
o
sim
istnieniu
from
Dreams.
Media Molecule, the team behind Little Big Planet. Dreams was officially announced by Sony back at E3 2015, but didn't
Little
launch
Big
till
Planet
2020.
akurat było świetne. No, było naprawdę dobre, cholera.
After being released via an early access
I na
program that was a
PSP, i
first for
później na
Sony,
jakieś
Media
PS3 czy
Molecule
4.
used Dreams as a platform to release several in-house titles over the years, including the charming little puzzle game Tren, which came out just last summer. While you can still buy the game for your PS5, Media Molecule have now ended support for Dreams as of September 2023, which also effectively cancelled the planned online multiplayer mode too. And sadly, Media Molecule suffered as a part of the Sony layoffs in 2023, so what's next for the highly creative studio is a bit uncertain. Everybody's Golf, aka Hot Shots Golf in the US, is a sports series that dates all the way back to 1997 and is one of Sony's evergreen franchises. With 12 games across the series and Everybody's
Coś czuję,
Golf
że
title
teraz
has
popyt na takie gierki mocno spadł. Bardzo mocno.
appeared on every major Sony console bar the PS5, with the latest release being 2019's
Największy
Everybody's
chyba
Golf.
skok gier sportowych był w momencie, gdy Wii się pojawiło. Ludzie, którzy nawet nie grali w gry, kupowali Wii tylko po to, żeby z nim ćwiczyć, bo to było reklamowane jako taka konsola, łącznik między młodszym a starszym pokoleniem.
Well, you can
No.
play the original two games as well as 2017's Everybody's Golf on your PS5 right now. Surely it's just a matter of time until we see another installment in this long-running series. One of Sony's more esoteric franchises, Fat Princess, is just a bit of an odd one. Since the release of the first game in 2009, there have been two games since, both releasing in 2015, and each one has been different from the last. While the original game was more of a real-time strategy game, its sequel Fat Princess Adventures was a dungeon crawler, and Fat Princess Piece of Cake was a puzzle game for mobiles and the PS Vita. So in short, who the hell knows what's next for this eclectic franchise? Ghost of Tsushima is next on our list, and while the series is
Tu
very
jest
much
prawie,
in its
ja jestem prawie pewny, że będzie dwójeczka, jakieś przecieki tam się pojawiają, wydaje mi się, że nie bez powodu jedynka pojawiła się na PC-tach, będzie dobrą reklamą dla dwójki, która stanie się ekskluzywem, nie?
with only one main title to date, its success might pave the way for future titles. Since the game's release in 2020, we've had a PC release and a Director's Cut edition for PS5. But beyond that, we haven't had any concrete news on a sequel. There have been indications that the developers behind the game, Sucker Punch, are gearing up to make a sequel that could eventually see a release on PS5. But as I said, nothing solid right
Śliczna
now.
ta gra jest.
Sony have also announced
Naprawdę
the
ładna.
development of a film adaptation to potentially be directed by Chad Stahelski, the man behind all 4 John Wick films. So they clearly have high hopes for the game becoming a larger franchise. Now onto one of Sony's current big hitters,
No to jest
God of
coś,
War.
na co ja czekam i myślę wszyscy czekają. I to jak na Bloodborne'a, z tą różnicą, że Bloodborne'a nie zrobią, a God of War'a będą trzaskać na pewno, bo dobrze zarabia. God of War jest super i uważam, że nieironicznie odświeżenie go w ten nowy sposób jest udanym zabiegiem. Jest bardzo spoko. Zmiana ze slashera na bardziej taką fabularną przygodę z efektami zza pleców. Bardzo dobrze im to wyszło. Spoko to unowocześnili. Postać Kratosa zaliczyła mega jakby progres, jeżeli chodzi o rozwój taki charakteru. Z Kratosa nie stał się taki, wiesz, wojownik z prostą motywacją, taką wręcz sztampową, zemsta, utrata bliskich i tak dalej. Teraz jest to znacznie głębsza postać, mam wrażenie, z przemyśleniami, z doświadczeniem na karku. To fajnie połączyło fanów Kratosa, którzy razem z nim, mam wrażenie, dorośli i stali się na przykład ojcami. To wiesz, Kratos też został ojcem i myślę, że to mocno trafiło do takich gamerów. To też duży sukces tego nowego God of War'a. Nie zmienia faktu, że nie będąc ojcem, a po prostu młodym graczem, zarąbiście się mi grało w God of War'a zawsze. Czy kiedyś tam z ojcem na PS2, czy teraz na PS5. Jest spoko. Mam nadzieję, że God of War trafi do Egiptu i dostaniemy japońską mitologię w wydaniu spin-offu z Atreusem w roli głównej. Liczę na takie dwie rzeczy. Byłoby super.
While the franchise dates back nearly 20 years to the original game's release on the PS2 in 2005, it has had a massive revival in the last 6 years with Kratos' Norse set adventures. The latest game in the series, Ragnarok, launched in late 2022 and has had a DLC expansion in the form of Valhalla since, so the franchise is in very good health. With that in mind, it's only a matter of time until we can expect to hear about what's next for one of Sony's flagship franchises. Next up is another PlayStation mainstay, the legendary racing franchise Gran Turismo.
Stary, a Gran Turismo nie było takiego case'u, że przez krytyków zostało ocenione na 80 czy coś, a przez graczy na 2 na 10?
Original games released back in 1997, the series has had 8 mainline games to date, with the latest Gran Turismo 7 releasing in early 2022 for the PS4 and PS5 in time for the franchise's 25th anniversary. While it's a pretty safe bet to expect another game in the coming years, we might be waiting until the end of the PS5's life cycle, or perhaps even the launch of the PS6 until we
Grid
see
jest
another
spoko, Most Wanted jest spoko, ale reszta to samo. Mario Kart jeszcze jest fajny.
entry for Sony's flagship racer. In the meantime, you can always check out the Gran Turismo movie, which was released in 2023 and is broadly alright from what I've heard. The outlook is not as bright for our next series,
Gravity Rush. Było coś
With only
takiego
2 games to the
faktycznie.
franchise since the original game's release for the PS Vita in 2012, it's more of an outside chance that we'll see another entry anytime soon. Sadly, this is compounded by the fact that the dev team behind the games, aptly titled Team Gravity, was shut down back in 2020, a few years after the release of Gravity Rush 2. Both games are still very much playable on PS5 though, the original via its console remaster. Right, now on to one of the most successful franchises in Sony's recent history, Helldivers, which aside from the whole PSN account linking fiasco, is in incredibly rude health. It's only been a few short months since the launch of Helldivers 2, and the game has already sold more copies than the
Ty, a teraz
population of the
Helldivers 2
developers.
przypadkiem nie ma jakichś problemów? Bo ponoć bardzo gracze są zgorszeni mimo wszystko tą aferą. Mimo, że wyszło nie najgorzej, to ponoć Helldiversy zaliczyły spory spadek.
Home country of Sweden. Couple that with a long tail of content drops, including regular war bonds and an evolving game world and map, and it looks like we'll be enforcing managed democracy for a long, long time to come. Oh, and you can also play the original twin-stick shooter game on your PS5 as well, which is well worth your time. The Horizon franchise is another
Horizona
of
też będą doić, to jest jedna z gier, która najwięcej im zarobiła. Między innymi dlatego, że była sprzedawana w jednym z popularniejszych pakietów z samą konsolą, więc po prostu kupowali ją przy okazji, ale wydaje mi się, że dużo ludzi lubi Horizona. Dla mnie to jest po prostu ładna gra, którą pewnie kiedyś spróbuję z czystej ciekawości, ale to nie jest tak, że czuję się jakoś porwany i mega chętny na granie. Zdecydowanie bardziej jara mnie God of War, jeżeli chodzi o takie PlayStationowe ekskluzywy.
Sony's recent big hitters, with over 30 million game sales since the release of Horizon Zero Dawn back
Ale
in
koncept jest
2017.
ciekawy, powiem szczerze, żeby połączyć czasy prehistoryczne z cybernetyką.
Since then, we've had a DLC story expansion called The Frozen Wilds, which was released in late 2017, a full-fat sequel entitled Forbidden West that launched in early 2022, a PSVR 2 game called Call of the Mountain that came out in early 2023, and finally, a DLC story expansion for Forbidden West called Burning Shores, which also launched in 2023. So in short, that's a lot of Horizon in a short space of time, and there is a lot more on the way. Aside from PC releases for both main games, the
Oni będą
developers
doić
behind
ten
the franchise
franchise
have
mocno,
confirmed
czuję.
that they are working on both an online co-op game set within the Horizon universe, as well as a third game in the series. In stark contrast to Horizon, we haven't seen an
Infamous,
infamous
o
game for the best
kurde,
part of 10
stary.
years. And that was
To ma dużo fanów, nie?
with the release of the infamous Second Son expansion First Light back in 2014. Since the original game's launch in 2009 for the PS3,
Gierka
there have been
zapomniana,
3 main
ale
games and a
nie dla
handful of
wszystkich.
DLC expansions. But we've heard nary a peep from the franchise since 2014, which does not bode well for any future installments. That's largely down to the fact that the studio behind the infamous franchise then went on to make Ghost of Tsushima, which itself launched in 2020 for the PS4 and later on the
widzisz.
PS5. With the huge success of Ghost of Tsushima, it's unlikely that Sucker Punch will return to Infamous. But
Ja
that's
nawet
not
nie
to
wiedziałem,
say
że
that
to
another
ci
studio
sami
might
ludzie.
not pick up the baton, but at this point the franchise has
Dzięki
been
Svenie za
dormant
Prima.
for a
Dziękuję.
very long time. Next up is Invisimals, the augmented reality
Ale wiecie co? To na PSP działało, ale na konsoli nie będzie działać. I były próby robienia gier Invisimalowych na PlayStation typowo, nie portable. To było gówniane. Ja zdecydowanie byłem fanem tego na PSP z doczepianą kamerką. Świetne są Invisimale. Świetne, to były lepsze Pokemony po prostu. Zbierałeś się u siebie w pokoju czy na dworze, było fajnie, było spoko. I miałeś rozszerzoną rzeczywistość w momencie, gdy miałeś, nie wiem, 7-8 lat w 2008-2009 roku, to wydawało się po prostu czystą magią technologiczną.
franchise that is way bigger than it has any
Niesamowita
right to be.
sprawa.
The series comprises 5 main games, most of which are AR games for either the PSP or PS Vita, with the exception of The Lost Kingdom for the PS3. On top of all that, there has been a range of toys, trading cards and even an
Karty zbierałem jeszcze. Miałem, kurde, chyba wszystkie z pierwszej serii.
animated series that aired back in
Uwielbiałem
2013.
Invisimale,
With that all said,
naprawdę.
though, we haven't seen the little critters since 2016, so it's likely that this series might just be staying caged in the past. Now, here's a real blast from the past.
O,
Naughty
to tak
Dog's
samo, Boże, Jax i Daxter. Tylko tutaj jest taki problem, że moim zdaniem, nie wiem czy to jest hot take czy nie, ale solo gra Daxtera była lepsza, nieironicznie. To połączenie też było ok, ale solo Daxter był chyba lepszą grą ogólnie.
classic action platformer Jak and Daxter. While there hasn't been a new Jak game since 2009's Jak and Daxter: The Lost Frontier, which wasn't
Grałem
even
w to.
made by Naughty Dog, we've had 2 compilations set since then. First 2012's HD collection for the PS3, and then the Jak and Daxter bundle that was released in 2017. What the people really want, though, is a new Jak and Daxter sequel, and the
Daxter był
likelihood of that
zarąbisty.
happening is sadly pretty slim. But it's not completely out of the question. Naughty Dog
To był
themselves
w
have
ogóle dobry duet, tak jak ten Ratchet i Clank. Oni też mieli swoje osobne gry. Secret Agent Clank to była taka asasynowa gierka, skradanka, cholera jasna. Fajne to było nawet.
explored the possibility of a new game in the series, with art for a Jak 4 even existing in the Art of Naughty Dog book. So, who knows? Delving even further back into Sony's
Boże.
library, you will find
Coś
the
wątpię,
Jet's
żeby to
Moto
wróciło.
franchise, which has not seen the light of day for a whopping 25 years. The futuristic racer series comprises a trilogy of games that all launched for the PS1 between 1996 and 1999, but 2 subsequent entries into the franchise have both been cancelled mid-development. The first, Jet Moto 2124, would have
Jezu,
come
nie wiem
out
czemu,
hot
ale mi się przypomniała reklama World of Warcraft z Ozzym Osbornem. Sheriff!
on the heels of Jet Moto 3, while the second, Jet Moto Solar, was rumoured to be in development for the PS2. With both of these games not seeing the light of day, this franchise has all but stalled. Now on to Killzone, one of Sony's first-person
Killzone,
shooter
o Boże, no
franchises from the
było.
heyday of the PS2 and PS3 era. Between 2004 and 2013, the series saw 6 entries, with a trilogy of console
Też
games,
nie
a
jestem
pair of
targetem,
portable
ale pamiętam
adventures and
istnienie.
Shadowfall for the PS4, which was the last time we saw anything to do with the franchise. That was over a decade ago. Much like Infamous, Killzone was once one of Sony's flagship franchises, which has now kind of fallen out of favour.
Co sądzę o
That's in part due to
Wiedźminie? O, dobra, żebym się nie rozpowiadał za długo. W dużym skrócie, lubię tę grę. Uważam, że jest spoko, ale zdecydowanie ma wady i powiedziałbym, że jest maksymalnie 8 na 10. Ludzie w Polsce po prostu ją bardzo overrate'ują, bo polska gra, ale jest to gra dobra, ale nie jest wybitna.
to the fact that the developers behind the shooter series, Guerrilla Games, then went on to be the developer and custodian of the Horizon
Widz może o książki pytał? Nie, pytasz streamera o książki.
franchise, which has
Nie
naturally
ma
pushed
bata.
Killzone way down the pecking order. But there is still interest in the franchise to this day. Just look at the comments section on any of our Firearms Expert Reacts videos to see that. So there might still be hope for a Killzone resurgence one day. Next up we have Knack, which I'm not gonna lie,
To
when I
była
started
gra,
making this
która
video,
chyba jako jedna z pierwszych się pojawiła na PlayStation 4. Dobrze gadam? Tak mi się wydaje. Nie grałem w to, bo 4 to była konsola, którą skipnąłem. Ja z 3 na 5 się przesiadłem. Słyszałem, że było po prostu okej. To nie było nic wybitnego, ale było po prostu okej.
completely forgot about it. Somewhat bewilderingly, there have been 2
Lepsze to niż ten Robot Boy, kuźwa.
Knack games, with the first releasing as a launch title for the
Nie wiem, czemu
PS4
jestem
and a
takim
sequel
hejterem
following
tego
that up
robota, ale
4 years
wyglądał
later.
strasznie.
While neither were exactly critical darlings, the second game in particular sold quite poorly, so the chances of a Knack 3 are pretty slim. Next up we have The Last of Us.
I
the
tutaj
most
mam bardzo
recent
duży
of Naughty
problem, powiem szczerze. 1 jest bardzo dobra, 2 jest dobra, a 3 coś czuję, że będzie syfiasta fest, bo jest naciągane, historia się zamknęła, po co to ciągnąć dalej? Po co? Skok na kasę, gdy nie wiesz o co chodzi, chodzi o pieniądze. Jestem wkurzony, że w ogóle są plany robienia tego.
Naughty Dog's franchises. While there are technically more remakes and remasters of The Last of Us than there are
A w ogóle zremasterowanie tej 2 to też był niezły żarcik.
numbered entries in the series, it is another of Sony's crown jewels when it comes to their recent IPs, a status that has been further cemented by the critically acclaimed TV adaptation. While Naughty Dog have now confirmed that they have stopped development of an online multiplayer game set within the world, they have stated that they have more than one ambitious
Online
single-player
multiplayer
game in
game?
the works,
Litości.
and there's a good chance that one of those could be The Last of Us Part 3. Either way, with a second season of the TV show around the corner, there's definitely an appetite for more from the franchise.
The Last of Us jest lepszym serialem niż grą. Pozdro.
Little Big Planet, the highly creative and ambitious platforming series
To jest
that
fajne.
introduced us to the adorable
Taka
little
nostalgia,
Sackboy.
ziomek.
Since the release of the original game for the PS3 back in 2008, there have been Little Big Planet games for every major PlayStation console.
Boże,
and
Little
PlayStation
Big
Move.
Planet na
While we haven't had a
PSP.
numbered entry in the series since 2014's Little Big Planet 3, there have been plenty of Sackboy-related spin-offs, the most recent being the Sumo Digital developed Sackboy A Big Adventure in 2020.
Pamiętam, że strasznie się wkurzałem, bo była taka logiczna zagadka związana z tym, że trzeba było w dobrym miejscu dobre naklejki przyklejać na mapie i sobie stworzyć jakby mapę częściowo dzięki temu. No Sackboy miał dziwne mechaniki, takie no trochę kazał ci głowy użyć.
The original developers of the franchise Media Molecule have long since moved on to Dreams, which itself has now rounded down, but plenty of other devs have worked across the LBP or Sackboy IPs, so there is a pretty strong chance we'll see more of the franchise in some capacity in the
Fajna
future.
giera.
Loco Roco, the platforming
Jezu,
game
to tak
with a
samo PSP, bumperami się je rozdzielało. Pamiętam, że grałem w to i jeszcze chyba oglądałem u JJ Jokera, mam wrażenie.
that just rolls off the tongue. Since the original was released for the PSP back in
Patapony muszą
2006,
wrócić,
we've
guys.
had two
Chociaż a propos pataponów, to gość od pataponów robi grę, która nazywa się Ratatan i będziemy grali jak wyjdzie za rok chyba.
further entries into the series, with the latest Loco Roco Midnight Carnival launching in 2009. Well, it's been a good 15 years since then. You
Patapony
can
były
play
świetne,
all
no.
3 games in the series on your
Ale Loco
PS5
też było
via
dobre,
remasters,
cholera.
which are handily keeping the franchise relevant. While it would definitely be coming out of left field, there's still a chance that we might see a new Loco Roco at some point in the future.
Nie wydaje mi się.
Medieval is literal proof that you can bring a
O,
long dead
Medieval, grałem w to. To było na PSP, była jeszcze inna gra, która była związana z PlayStation Move'em i ona była taka trochę dziwna, ale też coś było z Medieval.
dormant Sony franchise.
Ale wyrywałeś
this
se rękę
list.
i walczyłeś
You see,
ręką,
while
nie?
the original two games launched for the
To była
PS1
dobra gra.
back in 1998
To była
and
bardzo
2000
dobra gra.
respectively,
Ten
after the
Medieval.
portable spin-off Resurrection, the franchise was flatlining for the best part of 15 years. That is
Ty, ale powiem wam szczerze, no pamiętałem to w swojej głowie trochę lepiej graficznie niż tutaj to widzę. Zawsze tak jest, nie? Ja pitole.
portable spin-off
Ja się świetnie w tym bawiłem.
Resurrection, the franchise was flatlining for the best part of 15 years. That is until it was
Dzięki,
brought back from
Arkulator,
the
za
dead.
Prima.
I'm really stretching these puns out now. For 2019's
Ej, zagrałbym w
all-singing,
to.
all-dancing medieval remake. While the reception to the remake was rather mixed, it just goes to show that Sony is still keeping tabs on some of those old franchises. Next up, we've got the off-road racing series MotorStorm,
Nie,
which
no
criminally
błagam, nie
hasn't
dla
had a
mnie.
new game since the 2012 release of MotorStorm RC. To make matters worse, Sony shut down the team behind the franchise, Evolution Studios, way back in 2016, although they did hold on to the IP for the franchise. Fortunately, a good chunk of the staff who worked at Evolution were taken on by Codemasters, but as for the MotorStorm series
Totalnie nie
itself,
jestem
it's
targetem.
pretty much in limbo right now. A quick word here on Evolution's other racing game Drive Club, which was released as a bit of a messy PS4 launch title before being extensively updated right up until Evolution Studios' closure. Sadly, it will likely now remain a rare barn find for budding racing game enthusiasts. Parappa the Rapper, one of the PS1's chief mascots,
nie wiedziałem,
has
że
had
coś
an
takiego
enduring
istnieje,
pop culture
stary,
legacy
co?
over the years, but not a
A
huge
to
amount of games to his
rytmiczna
name.
giera.
The original game launched all the way back in 1996 and was followed up by the spin-off Jamalami in 1999 before a fully fledged sequel for the
Nie, no
PS2 in
błagam.
2001. Since then, we've seen a remake of the original game, later revealed to be a remake
Ale
of the
kojarzę te
PSP port
postacie,
with
powiem
high-res
szczerze,
textures,
skądś.
which launched around the game's 20th anniversary. While you can play both of the original games on PS5 right now, Parappa's music career definitely needs a comeback. Parappa the Rapper Drill Edition, anyone? From one rhythm game to
O,
another now, as
tak.
next up is the Patapon series.
Pon,
The original
pon,
trilogy all
patapon.
released for the PSP between 2007 and 2011, and the first two games eventually got ported to the PS4 in 2017. But other than that, there has been little love from Sony
Cudowna
for this
gra.
quirky little franchise, which has
Mam
led to a
niepopularną
few
opinię
non-so-
odnośnie Potaponów. Uważam, że trzecia część była najlepsza. Nie wiem, ten fokus na jakby głównych takich bohaterów ze specjalnymi mocami mi się bardzo podobał.
Sony-sanctioned spiritual successors taking the reins. The most recent of which is a Kickstarter for a game called Ratatan, which
No,
launched its campaign
będzie.
in summer 2023.
Ty,
As for
ta kampania się zaczęła na Kickstarterze, gość tam miał zbierać kasę, uzbierał jakieś grube miliony chyba w ogóle. To w sensie taką kasę mu dali na stworzenie tej gry, zarąbiście wyszło.
what Sony has planned, it's anyone's guess. Next up, we've got one of the longest running PlayStation franchises, Ratchet and Clank. With the first game releasing way back in 2002 and the most recent launching in 2021, this prolific platforming series has been around for some time. With 17 games today, it's undeniably one of Sony's core IPs, despite only two of those titles releasing in the last decade. As I said,
Ratchet
the
jest
latest
fajny.
game Rift Apart launched in 2021 for the PS5
Fajny ten nowy
and even
Ratchet?
saw
No
a
nie wiem, czy
PC
warto w to
release in
kiedyś zagrać.
2023, which indicates the series is pretty high up the pecking order within Sony's roster. It helps
Ta,
matters
fajny?
that Sony now fully owns the core studio behind Ratchet's development, Insomniac Games. Speaking of which, yep, another Insomniac franchise is Resistance, a franchise
O Jezu,
that
było
last saw
coś
the light of
takiego.
day in 2012 with the PS Vita release of
Racja.
Burning Skies. Before that though, there was a
Jezu, jaki to jest
critically acclaimed
nostalgiczny materiał, o ilu seriach, o ilu franchise'ach sobie przypominasz. I teraz pomyślcie, zobaczcie jak ten film leci, już 17 minut, co chwilę jest jakiś nowy tytuł podawany i o tym wszystkim Sony zapomniało, nie? Przynajmniej na jakiś czas. Wiadomo, że tutaj był jakiś Ratchet, było coś, jakieś Helldivers, ale większość rzeczy totalnie zapomniana.
trilogy of shooters for the PS3 that
doją
launched in
tylko tego God of
2006,
War'a, doją
2008
tylko te
and 2011
Horizony
respectively, as well as a
i niby
PSP
spoko,
spin-off
ale
called
jednak.
Retribution. The franchise
Nie wiem,
had
mam
some
wrażenie, że biblioteka gier na PS2 była absurdalnie gigantyczna w porównaniu do tego, co oferuje PlayStation 5 na przykład, czy 4.
interesting ideas
Absurdalnie
and a whole
większe.
arsenal of futuristic weaponry.
I
Much
oczywiście
like
gry się
Ratchet
robiło
and Clank, but chances
w
of a
większej
Resistance
ilości, bardziej
4 are
masowo,
pretty
mniej
slim.
kosztowne były,
Insomniac
proces był
themselves have
inny,
said that a
ale no
new game of the
still.
franchise is a long shot,
Było ich znacznie
with neither
więcej.
the developers or Sony particularly interested in exploring the series further, which is a shame if you ask me. What's worse is that, much like the Killzone trilogy, the original PS3 games are locked to that console, so you can't even play them
To
on your
PS5
PS5.
ma jakieś gry? No słuchaj, Final Fantasy XVI i Final Fantasy najnowsze i i najnowsza gra Square Enix?
Returnal, another recent Sony exclusive, is very much in its infancy and could still be just a one-off. But since its release in 2021, the game has had a solid tale of additional content that's further bolstered the game. The game comes from the Finnish developers Housemarque, who have made a fair few other PlayStation exclusive shooters
W
that could
pewnym
also
sensie
see
ma gry z PS4, ta wiadomo, że nie o to chodzi, nie?
future releases, including Alienation, Super Stardust, and its spiritual successor Resogun. In the wake of Returnal's success, Housemarque officially became a PlayStation studio in 2021, so there's every chance that we might see a Returnal 2 or Returnal, or one of their other shooters in the near future. One of Sony's most beloved development studios, Team Ico,
Shadow
who
of
are
the
a part of Japan's
Colossus.
studio
Muszę w
and
to zagrać
responsible
kiedyś.
for
Ludzie
classic
mówią, że
games
świetna
Ico,
gra.
Shadow of the Colossus,
Że
and
bardzo
most
fajna.
recently The Last Guardian, have been shut down for well over a decade at this point. While The Last Guardian came out after their closure, that was developed by Fumito Ueda's independent team,
I The
Gen
Last
Design,
Guardian,
who are currently
właśnie.
working on a new unannounced game. Whether this will be exclusive to Sony is unknown at this stage, but it does leave these classics out in the wilderness a bit. At least you can still play The Last Guardian and Shadow of the Colossus on your PS5, the latter via a shiny new remake. But poor old Ico remains lost in the past at this point. Here's hoping we see a remake of that gem too at some point. Oh, and we also get a glimpse of Wonder in the Astrobot trailer, so
Zostaw
he's still
tego
on Sony's
Astrobota
radar at least.
obrzyganego.
SingStar, once one of the most prolific of Sony
Grałem w
franchises,
SingStara, stary! Polskie nuty śpiewane były, ale to chyba na PS3 akurat było. Ale no, było, stary. SingStar, Dance Star, była specjalna gra na PS3 z Michaela Jacksona, cała, wszystkie jego jakieś tańce z teledysków były. Michael Jackson Experience, czy coś takiego. Yes.
and alongside Guitar Hero and Rock Band, the peak of the social music game era is now almost certainly
Ale
dead.
to były
It has
fajne
been
party
7 years
gierki.
since we last saw a game in the series with the release of SingStar Celebration. And what's worse, the iconic team behind the franchise, London Studio, was brutally shut down earlier this year in widespread layoffs. So the future of this once popular singing series is looking pretty bleak. Sly Cooper, another Sucker Punch Studio
Zagrałbym
franchise,
Sly'a.
has sadly been AWOL since 2013's Thieves in Time. And what's worse is, again, like Resistance and Killzone, you can't play any of the series
Ej,
on
ta gra
modern
wygląda
consoles.
giga
So if
dobrze.
you want to play a Sly Cooper game in 2024, you'll need to dig out your PS3 and get the Sly Cooper collection. In lieu of no new game in the series, it's a real shame that Sony have effectively locked a fair few of their PS3 era franchises in the past. In his heyday, Sly was one of Sony's most popular mascots alongside Ratchet and Clank and Jak and Daxter, but sadly Sly has been discarded like an old toy. Another Sony franchise locked in the past is SOCOM US
Dobra,
Navy
nikt o tym nie
Seals, the
pamięta, nikt
third-person
tego nie wie.
tactical shooter
Jak ktoś
series
to grał, to
that had
pewnie ma
10 games
50 lat
released
i
across the
dzieci.
PS2, PS3 and PSP between 2002 and 2011. The last entry in the series, SOCOM 4, roughly coincided with the closure of the development studio behind the game,
SOCOM
Zipper
these nuts?
Interactive, who at the time they were shut down were working on another entry in the franchise. With it being so long since the release of the last game, I think it's pretty fair to say we've seen the last of SOCOM. Next up, we have another of Sony's current
Litości,
flagships,
mordo,
the
litości.
Spider-Man
Starczy
series.
już nam,
Since Sony
już nam
acquired the game
starczy.
rights to the web-slinger back in 2014,
Naprawdę.
we've seen 2 numbered entries into the series, as well as a Miles Morales
Zrób
spin-off that
tego
launched
Wolverina, bo już ile można z tym sikającym z rąk pająkiem.
alongside the PS5. And despite hacks that impacted developers Insomniac Games back in 2023 and revealed the studio's roadmap for the future, it's a pretty safe bet that we'll see a third game in the incredibly
Boś.
popular franchise, if not more. On a separate but related note, Insomniac are also working on a Wolverine game,
Tego
which
jestem
is set
ciekawy,
within the
powiem
same
szczerze.
continuity
Chciałbym
as
zobaczyć Wolverina i mam nadzieję, że będzie giga brutalny.
their Spider-Man titles. So in a decade's time, we could be looking at a video gaming equivalent to the Marvel Cinematic Universe. From one of their most well-known titles to perhaps one of their least, with the PlayStation
Sports
move-centric
Champions? Stary, grałem w to. Tam był sport, który nazywał się Walki Gladiatorów. Miałeś tarczę i miecz i byłem totalnym czempionem w to. I sekretne walki odblokowywałem z największymi z największych. Jezu, jakie to było dobre. Albo na przykład miałeś bocze, to było takie te rzucanie kulkami, takie kręgle, ale nie kręgle. Kręgle też tam chyba były swoją drogą. Miałeś łucznictwo, miałeś strzelanie z pistoletu chyba też do tarczy, chociaż to chyba było akurat w Londyn 2012 grze olimpijskiej. Było trochę tego.
franchise Sports Champions. The series is basically Sony's
Dyski były,
belated
rzut
answer
dyski,
to
o
the
właśnie,
mammoth
do kosza się rzuca, tak! No,
success of Wii Sports.
zarąbiste
But,
to
well,
było.
the franchise never really stuck the landing. There have
Oj, to
been
było
2 games
bocze.
to date, with the last launching in 2012, both of
Narciarstwo
which
było.
relied on the PlayStation Move peripheral. And
Świetna
unless
giera.
Sony brings back a revival of that tech,
Zawsze jak
I
wujek
doubt we're ever
przychodził do
seeing
nas, to żeśmy z ojcem i wujkiem grali, wszyscy się ścigali. To lepszy. Ja byłem giga dobry w gladiatorów, ale we wszystko inne taki średni.
this mini franchise ever again. Speaking of PlayStation Move franchises, there's also Start the Party.
Jeszcze
which
był
similar-
ping-pong, w to byłem dobry. W ping-ponga byłem wybitny w tych Sport Champions. Takie kurde podkrętki były. Jak mocno walnąłeś, to się piłka podpalała. No.
Similar to Sports Champions only saw 2 game releases, the last of which also launched in 2012. And to be honest, neither game in the party game series really set the world alight, so let's just leave them in the past. One of Sony's most popular franchises from the PS1 era, Siphon Filter, has now become one of the
ziomek,
company's long
hooker.
lost series.
Nie no.
We haven't seen a release in the spy shooter series since Logan's
Siatkówka
Shadow
też
for
była
the
bez
PSP
ki-
in
Dobra, sorry, już się
2007,
podjarałem
which
za
is
bardzo.
just criminal. The original trilogy are still held in extremely high regard, even if they might not have aged so well. But unlike other long-lost Sony franchises, you can actually play the majority of the
Usiądź
Siphon Filter
normalnie, bo na stare lata kręgosłup się odezwie. Widzu, pewnie piszesz to siedząc gorzej ode mnie.
franchise on your PS5 right now, which is great. But whether this iconic series has any brand recognition anymore might count against it when Sony considers what to reboot next. Twisted Metal, Sony's vehicular combat game, is a very weird little franchise to pin down. The series has been around since 1995 and was undeniably at its peak during the PS1 era. But since then, there have been a handful of Twisted Metal games on the PS2 and PS3, including a soft reboot of sorts that launched in 2012, which also happens to be the last time an original game in the series was released. The PS2 game Twisted Metal Black eventually found its way onto the PS4 via a port, but other
Nie
than
znałem
that, the
tego.
franchise has been kinda quiet. That is until a TV show with an all-star cast came the hell out of nowhere last year. Starring Anthony Mackie and Stephanie Beatrice, the show did so well that it has already been renewed for a second season. What this means for any future games is anyone's guess, but the brand is firing on all cylinders again, so why not greenlight a new game? Right, we're nearly done with this mammoth look at Sony's franchises,
Dobra,
but
daj
we've still got a
spokój.
big
Zróbmy swojego Indiana Jonesa. Zróbmy swoją Lara Croft.
one to go. Uncharted. Yep, Nathan Drake was effectively the poster boy for PlayStation for nearly a decade from 2007 to 2016, but he had his swan song in Uncharted 4: A Thief's End. That game wasn't the last we've seen. As a follow-up, The Lost Legacy, that starred rival treasure hunter Chloe Fraser and mercenary Nadine Ross, released in 2017. So there's clearly still scope for more adventures in the Uncharted franchise without Nathan Drake. Since then, we've seen the Legacy of Thieves collection launch in 2022, which bundled A Thief's End and Lost Legacy together into one compilation. And around the same time, we also had the Tom Holland and Mark Wahlberg starring film adaptation, with a sequel supposedly in production. So there's still
Nice.
definitely gas in the tank for the adventure franchise.
Nigdy nie grałem,
The
ale dużo
interactive horror game
słyszałem.
Until Dawn is one of Sony's IPs
Until
we'll
Dawn
be
jest
seeing again,
świetny,
albeit
stary. Znaczy świetny. Jak na gry filmowe, horrorowe, fajny klasyczek, taki slasher, głupkowaty, fabuła trochę się nie klei, ale dobrze się przy tym spędza czas, po prostu spoko się siedzi. Naprawdę przyjemna giera.
via a
I teraz
remake of
wychodzi
the original
remaster.
2015 game.
Slash
The
remake.
fact that we're
Nie
getting a
wiem, co
remake though
dokładnie.
might trigger more interest in the series, which has only had 2 releases to date, with the other being the PSVR title Rush of Blood. We'll just have to wait and see how the remake performs when
Taki
it releases,
klasyczek.
as to whether this franchise will be given a new
Czajcie,
lease
że
of
ta gra ma
life.
10 lat
And
już?
we end this list with the legendary Vib Ribbon.
O Jezu,
Wait,
kojarzę to.
What do you mean you've never heard of Vib Ribbon?
Nie, ja to
The classic
kojarzę.
rhythm game
Widziałem
has
to
been
gdzieś,
knocking
kurde,
about since
kiedyś. Nie grałem w to.
1999 when the
Nie widziałem, żeby ktoś w to grał, ale widziałem obrazy z tego na pewno.
first game launched on the PS1. But to be fair, if you're an American watching this video, Vib Ribbon didn't release in the States until 2014, after the then Sony CEO Sean Layden name-dropped it at E3 2014 without realizing that it never launched in
Kurde,
the
to
US.
jakaś mini sekretna
Anyway,
giera.
the original was followed up by Mojib Ribbon and Vib Ripple, both of which never made it out of Japan. Maybe little Vibri the Rabbit will finally get their spot in the lineup.
Dużo było takich gier, które w Japonii tylko wychodziły. Nawet Kingsfield, czyli seria poprzedzająca Demon Soulsy. Jedna z części była tylko w Japonii. W Japonii mają 4, my mamy 3, nie?
Like one day.
And that, my friends, is the current state of PlayStation's franchises.
Zobaczcie,
Please let me
ile
know
tego,
if there are
kurde,
any others that I've
przepadło,
missed in the
nie? W
comment section down
niepamięć.
below.
Ach, to Sony. No nic, chociaż God of War'ka zrobią, tyle wiemy, nie? Tyle wiemy.